Well, happy quarantine. I would imagine that some of you home gym folks have seen the video that Coop of Garage Gym Reviews recently did on how to add a cable attachment system to your power rack. Now, Coop's method works. It absolutely works. It's very cheap and it's very easy. And so, if you're somebody who just needs some sort of basic cable functions and you don't want to use a lot of weight, then hey, go for it. That's totally fine. I'm going to show you my method for this, which is a little bit more, let's call it obsessive, um, because I wanted to solve all of the problems with a method like that without buying a commercial lat pull down system or spending a bunch of money or buying some crap from Titan that was out of stock anyway, that still didn't solve all the problems. So as you can see, this is a tiny gym. This is the footprint of this gym is 12 feet by 14 feet, if memory serves. So I definitely don't have room to add a freestanding lat pull down system. And I want stuff that stows away. I want minimal floor space intrusion. So the requirements I wanted for this was I wanted to be able to use quite a bit of weight, which meant I needed a leg hold down system. I wanted to be able to pull on a vertical axis, not at an angle. And I wanted everything to stow away, and I wanted to be able to do it myself with what I had. So here are the things that I had. I had Rogue safety spotter straps. Now, of course, this is not a Rogue specific build. You could do this with Titan products or Rep products or whatever, right? The principles are the same, but the details may just be altered slightly. I also had spotter arms that I had bought to be able to do things like pressing, pin presses outside of the rack or something like that. So I came up with this solution that didn't cost very much money and solves all of the problems and is easily stowable. So the first thing I want to mention before we get into this is that Rogue would probably be not too happy with some of the modifications that I've made to this rack from a liability perspective. So none of this constitutes advice. I am just telling you what I did. I'm okay with what I did. If you do this and something breaks or you hurt yourself, I am not liable. Do this at your own risk. So the first being, of course, they tell you never to put a reverse hyper attachment on a rack that's not bolted to the floor, and this is a flat foot rack, and I disobeyed that. The second is because I bought this rack used, and it was a custom height rack that somebody bought to put in a basement. The uprights were cut shorter than normal. So this is a 390F, and it's been cut. It's probably got a foot out of it. The problem with that is that the very top bolt in these upright cross members sits in about a half moon-shaped valley rather than a full hole. I'm not super thrilled with that, but I'll explain why that had to occur and why I couldn't just run it one step down as we get into this. If you have a full-sized rack or a full height rack, that's probably not going to be a concern for you. Anyway, let's dive into what we have here. So on this side, we have a simple loading pin with a chain. Now this is just a tow chain I had. You can use any old chain for this that's rated to the loads that you plan on using. And I've got a carabiner on the loading pin, and then the chain, and then another carabiner. The purpose of the chain is twofold. One, and the primary purpose, is that the links give you a way to adjust the final length of the total system. So what that means is that your cable length doesn't have to be perfect, and by either adding or removing links, by just clipping the carabiner to a different link, I can adjust the starting position of the attachments over here. I can drop them or raise them. And so what's nice about that is that if I do something like what I have now and I want to do a lat pull down, I want it at max height because I want a big lat stretch at the very top of the movement and I want to maximize my range of motion. If I was doing something like tricep press downs, for instance, maybe I don't want to have to reach all the way up there to pull them down and then get into position. Maybe I want it to start maybe here. So then I just clip the carabiner to a chain length that's further down, and that lengthens the total system. The second benefit to the chain is that you can take this chain and you can throw the excess bit in the floor, and that allows some of the weight to stay on the floor, and it kind of keeps the weight from moving about a little bit. Coop talked about that in his video. Now, with a chain this light and this short, I don't think the effect of that's going to be very substantial, but it doesn't matter very much because, unlike other systems, this can swing a little bit and not hit anything. Now, that is accomplished by using these arms, and we'll get to that in the next step here. So one very common solution that people have for pulley systems for power racks is to buy, I know Titan sells a high-low pulley kit, or you could buy shackles and then attach the pulleys to the shackles. So you would have a shackle that bolts to the upright, and then it just has a little loop and a carabiner goes there. Well, then the pulley is here. Well, the problem with that is that if the weight is between the uprights of the rack, one, you have to remove your safeties. You can't leave them on. Two, you have to make a little platform for it to sit on, or else it's going to beat the piss out of your bottom cross member every single time you drop the weight down. Third, because a loading pin does not have a big base on it, and this is not a very big width space, it's not going to always sit flush. It's going to want to tip and fall and just be a pain in the ass. So by using the spotter arm to move the system out, now the pin sits right in the middle of the horse stall mat. It sits flat. I don't have to worry about it banging into anything. It's great. So then we move up here. So this is just a $10 National Hardware pulley that you can get from Amazon or the hardware store. This one's a 4-inch. You don't need a 4-inch. You get or maybe it's a 3-inch. But you could get it's a 3-inch, and you could get the 2-inch one, and I think that one's rated up to 450 pounds. This one's 650 pounds. And then there's a carabiner and an eye bolt. Now this eye bolt is a 5/8 inch diameter, 10-inch long. It doesn't need to be that long. Now the 5/8 is because I have a Rogue Monster Light rack, so these pinholes are 5/8. So what that is that it's just the pin, or the eye bolt, is run through the hole in the spotter arm, and then there's a nut and a washer on the top side and a couple spacers just to tighten it up. You don't have to do the spacers. I just did that to eliminate any rattle from it having slack in it. So then, as you can see, it's just a carabiner that clips the pulley to the eye bolt. Now the spotter arms are installed horizontally on the upper cross member. Sorry about that light. That's not really something I can avoid. And so you have the weight is being held by the pin that is welded into the top of the bracket for the spotter arm, and the pin that is supposed to, that they install to keep it from swaying and moving. So the weight is on these two pins. Now my ceiling is too low for me to swing the arms over the top, so this bracket is on the bottom. It's not a big difference, but I probably would have done it. I would have flipped them the other way if I had the ability to do so. So then when we come across to the other side, it's basically the same system. Now again, I had to make a couple modifications because my rack is short and I wanted a full stretch at the very top of a lat pull down. So for this one, the eye bolt is on the top and the pulley sits on the side. Now this is the UHMW plastic side right here, so it's not really scuffing anything, and it doesn't move too much, and it clears just barely right here without rubbing. It doesn't rub on the rack. Again, if you have a normal height rack, this is probably not an issue for you, and you can just run the eye bolt in the same position as you would on the other side and have a cleaner installation, and it just wouldn't be a problem. The other thing I ended up having to do is on this Elite cambered multi-grip is I actually have it through have the carabiner through the main center instead of just in the loop, because again, this is just about an inch extra of clearance, and this system has been tuned to where I just barely get a full lat stretch, and then that, it's a 1/4 inch above that where the plate touches down. So I've got it just exactly where I want it. Again, this is going to take a little fiddling on your part to get it how you want it for your system. So the other really nice thing, so there are 2 big benefits to doing it this way in addition to not beating on your rack. If you do the way that Coop and some of the other guys have suggested, and again, those have their place, but if you want to go above and beyond and make this a little more creative and a little more perfect, the Coop system has it where you just throw a strap or a shackle or something over either the chin-up bar or over the cross member, and you have a single pulley system, so the weight is going to sit directly below the pull-up bar, and then you're going to have to pull at an angle because it's just a single pulley system, and you can't, the weight can't be in your lap. So as you could see, if you had a single pulley system, then you'd be pulling at, say, this kind of an angle. I'm trying to get that light away to not blind you, but you'd be pulling at, say, this kind of an angle. The other problem with that is that you have nothing to hold your feet down. So, maybe if you went out and bought some really long steel pipes that could go through the cross members, these spotter arms are not long enough to cross the rack. They only go between the front and rear uprights. So there was no way to easily come up with a solution for that. But by using this side-to-side approach, now I get to use the safety spotter arm as a leg hold down. Let me demonstrate that. So I can slide in here, put my knees underneath the strap, feet are on the cross member, and now I'm nice and secure. This is in the rack really hard. I'm maximally contracting my calves right now. And there's no movement in this whatsoever because these are the way that these are designed. So I've got a leg hold down. Awesome. Also, the other benefit to this way of doing things, what's going on, puppy dog? Are you in my way? Is that now, because the axis is moved out a foot or 2 feet from the uprights of the rack, now the pulling axis is vertical. It's not at an angle anymore. So this more closely simulates a commercial lat pull-down machine. And that may not sound like a big deal, but if you've ever used one of these sort of jerry-rigged pulley systems where you have to pull at an angle, you basically just feel like you're doing half-ass rows. It really does not feel the same as a lat pull-down machine. I had this set up with just a single pulley and things before this, and I just hated it. It just wasn't any good. So this is a way better setup. So you have a vertical pulling axis. You have a place to put to hold yourself down. You have the nice loading pin with the adjustability to be able to move the height. The other thing is I want to give credit where credit is due. With regard to these cables, there was a guy with a YouTube channel named Jim in the Gym, so Jim in the GYM. He did a fantastic video on how to make these cables correctly. So you can, of course, go to the hardware store and you can buy however length of cable you need, and you can buy those little U-bolts, and you can get by with that. But problem is, those don't hold super well at heavier weights. They also, you end up with a bunch of little jagged ends from the threaded ends of the U-bolt that stick out, and there's just, a lot of issues with that. What I have done is that I bought the proper swedging connections. Now they're underneath this electrical tape that's just kind of there to keep the very end strands of the cable from fraying and sticking you. So what those do is the cable goes in one end of it, you loop the cable around, shove it back in the other end, and then you use a swedging tool to mash all the metal together in 3 places. And that actually bonds the metal, so it becomes one. you have like a steel cable and you have an aluminum, um, I can't remember, ferrule maybe is the name for that. I can't recall off the top of my head. But you mash the aluminum into the steel and it becomes sort of one thing. I also have some eyelets that I installed in the end of the cable just for smoothness and to keep it from fraying the cable over time. And then for cable stops, I just drilled holes through golf balls and they work just fine. So again, Jim in the gym, thanks for the video about that. Also, one of the things he mentions is he talks about swedging tools and says that the sort of cheapest one is, I think, an AW that he would recommend was like an AWS, which is like kind of an expensive one. And I ended up cheaping out and buying one from Menards for like, I don't know, $25, $30, something like that. And it worked just fine for my purposes. Again, if you were going to make 1,000 cables, maybe it would suck. But for making, I've made 3 and it works just fine. So, yeah. So good deal with the cables. And then I also have, because I have these other cables, so 2, like one really short and one sort of medium length cable. So now I then have the ability, if I add a pulley, that I can either, well, I wouldn't even necessarily have to add a pulley. I could come up here and take, because this is just attached with a carabiner, right? So you could take the carabiner off of the eye bolt here, and then you could run either, you could put a hitch pin or a band peg in the bottom down here, and then use a strap like this. This is a motorcycle tie-down strap you can buy on Amazon for super cheap, and they're rated to ridiculous amounts of poundages. Or you can just feed this under the rack and loop it around, and then you stick the carabiner in here, and then you hook the pulley to that, and now you have a low pulley, right? So instead of the cable coming across horizontally here, it would come from that pulley and go down and be anchored on a pulley at the bottom, and now you've got something for curls and everything else. I don't know that I'll ever do that because I'm not really a huge cable guy. I just kind of use these for lat pulls and triceps, but you could do that. And then the other nice thing with as far as expandability for this system is that because these are spaced out, if I bought 2 more pulleys, whoop-de-doo, $20, then you can have a pulley on each side. Well, I'd have to buy another loading pin too, but you could have a pulley and a loading pin on each side. They would sit out and be out and away from things. And then you could use the same technique here of, say, run a band peg. Or another just helpful tip. So you can buy expensive band pegs from, different companies, but you can also just buy trailer hitch pins for $5 at the hardware store, and they work just fine too. But anyway, you just wrap this, and it's hard to do with one hand, but maybe you get the idea. You also would probably want a longer one than this. This is one of the ones that Rogue sends. It's not very long. The actual truck hitch pins are a lot longer. But you just wrap it here, and then you put the carabiner here, and you put a pulley on that. Now it's redirected from up here to down, and you've got something that you can have 2 independent cable systems in a Y configuration, like a cable crossover. So you can make your own cable crossover here, and you can do those flies and shoulders and whatever bullshit bodybuilders do. So anyway, let me give you a demonstration of this, and we'll wrap up here because I'm getting a little rambly. See if I can find a place to sit this phone. All right, that's probably good. Oh, fail. All right. So again, you got a nice hold down. I can barely reach this attachment, which is a good thing. Now I've got full lat stretch, and I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but the plate is still hovering right now. My lats are fully stretched. I can get a full deep contraction here. Be all the way back. Nice big range of motion. Just like that. And then to sort of wrap up here, we have, oh, I flipped the video. Oh, that's a bummer. Anyway, pardon me. The stowaway of this is also a big consideration. So, pardon me, I got to flip this video again. Okay. So obviously I would just take this off and then I store this over against the wall. And then this one just kind of, I leave tight. It's not really a big deal. And then this side, you take the loading pin off and the chain and everything. And then I've got a place over here that I just hang this stuff. So it just hangs against the wall on this little clothing rack, or you could just put stuff here. But, you know, you can stow this stuff away and out of the way. And then this cable, I draw this tight on this end, and you could either just loop it around up here, or in my case, I pull it taut and then clip it just to anything back here on the back of this hyper. You could clip it on a band peg back here or just anything like that. So at the end of the day, when this is done, what you have when this is stowed away is that it's tall enough where it's never in your way unless you press in the rack, which I can't because my rack's too short. So I press on the front uprights. I press out here outside the rack. So it stows away. You're never hitting your head on it. It's never in the way. It also gives a storage place for these spotter arms that used to just be laying in the floor. And it's great. It's just completely out of your way. The other nice thing is that because all of this is sort of a quick connect system with carabiners, it's really easy to unclip that carabiner, unclip that carabiner, toss the cable stuff, you know, either in the floor or drape it over the rack or something. And then you just pull one hitch pin out, rotate the arm, pull it off, and you can use it. You slide it on the front of the rack and use it as a spotter arm. It's not a permanent installation. Now, what I'll probably do with these eye bolts is I will probably mark these about here, right? And I'll take a grinder and I'll cut them off. And the reason for that is when I've got them set up, say I want to bench with this Swiss bar, I can bench with the Swiss bar. I can do it inside the rack, but I can't do it on that back upright. I have to do it on this side of the upright because of the reverse hyper. So I have to like maneuver and finagle my way in there, and it's just a pain. So I would rather bench on this upright when I'm using the Swiss bar, and I like to have the spotter arms for that. And so what I will do, the reason I'm going to cut that eye bolt off at the length I need it, is that way it's not a jagged bolt that's sticking in here and being in the way where I might hit it with my shin or something like that. But again, really easy modular system that can be, you know, adjusted. It doesn't cost very much money. I don't know what I have in it total, to be honest. I think the Rogue loading pin's $20. The chain I already had. It's just a tow chain I kept in the truck. I bought a 6-pack of carabiners for $10, I think. Although I will caution you, you probably want to get a couple different kinds of carabiners because they don't all work in the same way. So, for instance, this is a larger sized, this is a Fusion carabiner, and you can see that it's very open, right? So this is something that I needed to be able to get around this pipe and hold properly onto this attachment versus these little cheap, like this is what I bought in that 6-pack, are these style. Now these are about 3 inches long. That one's a 4-inch long carabiner. And I have that Fusion one also going through the loading pin. I have 2 of those. And the reason being, those wider jobs can rotate like this, so you can hook it into the loading pin and then spin it and hook it onto the chain rather than trying to like finagle the chain onto the lower portion. It's not very good. But these work great on, like the ends of the cables, or, I've got a little wider one again attaching to the eye bolt because the eye bolt's pretty thick and it doesn't quite fit through that gap. You can get it on there, but once you flip it, it won't go into the recessed end of this. It gets stuck right here in the narrow section on these carabiners. So I would say you probably want more of a D-shaped carabiner rather than these style. They're just a little more versatile for this application. But yeah, all right, 25-minute video. Pardon me. Hopefully you've taken something away from this endless rambling, and this helps you have a more functional gym and helps you be stronger. Have a good one.